The interaction in courts is organized as a series of question-answer sequences. By a series, what I mean is that questions are linked together, leading to a point. They're not just randomly distributed questions. One question about one thing and another question about another thing, etc. They don't go like that in the way that we might do in ordinary conversation. You might ask about one thing, but then the conversation quickly moves on to something else. They are leading to a point. And questions, think of these linkages between questions in different ways. One is the question may be cooperative. That's to say, leading to a point, helping to support the witness's story. This is in direct examination. And then, alternatively, questioning may be hostile. That's to say, leading to a point that doubts or compromises or undermines the witness's account, and that's in cross-examination. Now, this is an essential and key difference. Again, in terms of mode, we've got examination, courtroom examination, but actually there are two different types. Direct examination is where a witness or defendant is being questioned by, as it were, their own lawyer, their own attorney. Whereas if they're being cross-examined, they're being examined by the attorney for the opposite side. So if I'm a defendant and I'm being questioned by the attorney who is on my side, whom I've hired to do this, then that person does direct examination. That's to say, you expect the questioning to be cooperative. If, on the other hand, or when the defendant is being cross-examined by the prosecution, that questioning is cross-examination, because that questioning will be attempting to undermine the defendant's case. So that's hostile. So that's a key difference. Direct examination is cooperative, cross-examination is hostile. Now, I want to show you, in order to fill this out, I want to show you cases from a murder trial. The murder trial is American. It's rather difficult for us to get hold of these kind of data from English trials, or from UK trials. But so this one is from an American murder trial, in which the witness here is the defendant. She's accused of being an accessory to murder, and I've given you a brief account here that earlier on the day of the murder, the defendant's boyfriend, and I use the term that she uses and is used throughout in this trial, the boyfriend, was wounded in an altercation with a friend. That the defendant and her boyfriend drove back to their apartment. They collected a gun, and then they drove back over to the apartment block where the victim, this friend, lived. The prosecution case is that the defendant ran ahead of her boyfriend. So if she goes ahead, she hammers on the door and gets the victim to open the door. Then, of course, she's got access to her boyfriend. Her claim is that she did indeed run ahead of the boyfriend and hammer on the door, but she was doing it in order to warn the victim. So what happened was that indeed the victim did open the door. The boyfriend rushed in behind the defendant and shot him dead. So now I've got two excerpts here for the same murder trial, the same defendant. First of all, she's examined by her own lawyer, by the defense lawyer. To begin with, again, remind you that the transcription symbols will be found at the end of the lead-in task. But I'll read it to you. As you went from the car up the cement walk to the front door, do you know whether you were observed or did you hear anyone call out? And she says, no one called me. And you went in the front door and up the stairs. Can you describe how you went upstairs? I ran up. Now tell His Honor and the jury exactly what you did at the time that you got to the door that was the entrance door into Ezra McLean's room. She says, I ran up the stairs. I was banging on the door. I said, Ezra, it's Dot. I've got something important to tell you. And what was that something important that you wanted to tell? That he was coming with a gun, try to do something, try to leave, do something, get away. And after you knocked on the door. Now, this is cooperative questioning. And I will just want to show you about 3 features of what makes the questioning evidently cooperative, helpful, trying to help his witness. Notice the extent to which each question takes on trust the veracity of the prior answer. In line 4, she said, "No one called me." Notice actually that she's repeated, in line 2, "Did you hear anyone call out?" She says, "No one called me." So she repeats the call. No one called me. After a 0.5 second pause, he then says, "And you went in the front door." That question takes on trust the truthfulness of that answer. It doesn't question it. We'll see in cross-examination, it's very different. You get things like, "No one called you, really? How did you?" etc. So it's not skeptical. It takes on trust that. So in a sense, the questioning is cumulative and not contesting, as I've shown here. And the other feature of this is that you'll see that in line 15, she says, "It's Dot, I got something important to tell you." And in line 17, the attorney says, "What was that something that you wanted to tell?" It again takes on trust that indeed that's what she was doing. There's no questioning of that. So that's a first feature that I wanted to highlight for you. Here's a second one. It appears to be very slight, but it turns out to be hugely important. Notice that his questions, not all of them, but all of the ones in these brief selections, begin with and you went in the front door, and what was that something, and after you knocked on the door. And is used to preface agenda questions. If we have an agenda of questions, kind of routine questions, and what's your name and what's your husband's name? I'm thinking of health visitor interviews. The health visitor asks, and what's your name and what is your husband's name and how old are you, etc. You get questions which are and prefaced. They mark this as just innocuous, neutral. They are just part of a kind of almost like a pro forma agenda. And she does this. He does this. It's a male barrister attorney. Does this quite routinely. You won't see this much in cross-examination, except in one case that I'll show you, which is strategic. But so that's another feature. Here's a third feature. When the defendant says, and I said, "Ezra, it's Dot, I got something important to tell you." In line 17, the attorney asks, "And what was that something that you wanted to tell?" Now, notice that he's asking her about a motivation. What lay behind? What lay behind what you said? That is very characteristic of direct examination of cooperative, because you're asking your witness, in this case, defendant, you're asking them about what were their motives for doing something, which in a sense justifies their action. This is completely different in cross-examination, when actually the questioning focuses very much on direct conduct. What was your conduct? Let's not get into your mindset or what lay behind what you wanted to do, what you intended to do. What did you do? That's what you find in cross-examination. So here are 3 features, just briefly to resume them. Firstly, you get this acceptance, cumulative acceptance of each answer by the defendant, not contesting it. And very often that takes the form of repeating not all, of course, of what they've just said, but repeating part of what they've said. You get use of and prefaces, which highlight that this is just a kind of a fairly neutral agenda. And thirdly, you get questions about the defendant's witnesses' motives. These are just three. What I'm trying to convey is what makes the language of direct examination distinctive. Now, you'll get a sense of distinctiveness when we look at the same defendant being cross-examined. This is to say, the DA is the district attorney in the American system, the prosecuting lawyer. And you'll read this and you'll see just how different this is from direct examination. And you had strong feelings over Larry at that time. Yes, I was his girlfriend at that time. You were upset because he was stabbed? I wasn't upset. You weren't upset, you were happy. No, you had no feelings at all about the wound that he had. I was concerned about what was going on. Did you feel sad that he was wounded? I don't know. You don't know how you felt? I mean, you could have been happy? No. You didn't feel happy, I guess. But you don't know if you felt sad or not. I felt bad some. You felt bad some. You do remember. Yes, I felt bad some. You remember that. Now, one way that you can tell that this is putting pressure on the defendant is, I've marked this in line 16, that her voice begins to break. Actually, even in line 14, this, I guess, the two colons there indicate a sound stretching. She's beginning to sound very much less confident. She's losing confidence in what she's saying. And by the time she gets to line 16, she's really breaking up. I've heard this time and time again in trials, that witnesses under this kind of pressure begin to feel to lose confidence. So that's what it looks like, and you can tell how different this is. Now, the question is, how can you tell? What are the, as it were, the language differences? Well, first of all, each question, whereas in in direct examination, each next question seemed to accept the veracity, the truthfulness, the credibility of the previous previous answer rather. Here, each question implies a challenge, implies it's implicit, it's indirect, but it implies a challenge to the defendant's prior answer. So here, you weren't upset, you were happy. She says no. And here, you had no feelings at all about the wound that he had. Even line 5, the defendant answers, I wasn't upset. The question was, you were upset because he was stabbed? And she answers, I wasn't upset. You weren't upset? You were happy? This is, of course, tendentious, but we'll come on to that in a moment. But you weren't upset, you were happy. That implies a skepticism with her answer, I wasn't upset. And then again, when she answers no, you had no feelings at all about the wound that he had, is questioning in that idiomatic sense of questioning, that is implying a challenge or skepticism to that. Then in the part below, you didn't feel happy, I guess. You don't know if you felt happy or sad or not, is taking issue with line 14, I guess. But you don't know if you felt sad or not. I felt bad some. You felt bad some. You do remember. Now he's implying a challenge. You felt bad some. So okay, you do remember. And then when she says, I repeats, yes, I felt bad some. You remember that. He keeps plugging away at as it were, the inconsistencies. Now she does remember. So each question implies a kind of challenge. So there'll be different kind of grounds for those challenges. Sometimes that it's not completely truthful, or sometimes that it's inconsistent, but whatever. So questions challenge prior answers. Now, how do they do that? They raise contrasts. So here in line 4, she says, I wasn't upset. And in line 5, you remember this one, the tendentiousness of it is, you weren't upset, you were happy, as though there were only two emotions that you could feel. If you're not upset, you could have been happy that he was sad. That's plainly not the case. That's not what she's trying to say. But his are, they are not, of course, trying to discover what she's trying to say. He's trying to counterpose. If you weren't upset, you must have been happy. No, of course she's going to deny that. Then further down, when he asks, did you feel sad that he was wounded? She, one might say, is a little bit evasive. I don't know, which is a claim not to quite remember how she felt. Did you feel sad that he was wounded? She's trying to avoid, of course, these kind of negative emotions. Now he takes she answers, I don't know, he then treats, you don't know how you felt, as being, she doesn't know how she felt. You could have been so you could have been happy. It goes back to his point in line 5. No, you know you didn't feel happy, I guess, but you don't know if you felt sad or not. So he's setting up these contrasts, which in a sense are unreal. They're certainly invidious, but they're unreal contrasts. But that is what people do actually in argument a lot. So this again is generalizable to what we do in argument, but here, of course, it's in a very specific kind of context. But that sense of argument or argumentative is, of course, what cross-examination is about. Here's a third feature, and I haven't said very much yet about how the defendant is being defensive, but I just wanted to point here to the defendant's use of words, her lexical selection, her word selection, how carefully she's choosing word or trying to use words in order to avoid the implications of his questions. So if you're doing this with students, you think about what is the implication of a question and how does the defendant, in this case, the defendant, try to, as it were, avoid those implications. In the first case, in the line 3, he asks, you were upset because he was stabbed? And she says, I wasn't upset. Denies being upset. So that is defensive. When he comes back at her in line 7 with, he had no feelings about the wound that he had. No feelings, she now substitutes with, I was concerned. And now I was concerned denies of course it's a feeling. So it's not, I didn't have any feelings, but the feeling is concern. So she's got something which she's a bit more comfortable with. He avoids that. He elides that completely. Did you feel sad that he was wounded? Now, I don't know is again trying to avoid the implication of feeling sad. And when he asks in line 15, if you felt sad or not, I felt bad. She's replacing sad with bad, replacing one with bad. And bad is, in a sense, less implicative than sad. Sad is implicative in the sense that if she felt sad, then she might be more prepared to do something to help a boyfriend in the project of going back to kill the victim. But feeling bad is a little different from that. It doesn't have quite that kind of implicativeness. So one looks carefully at how defendants respond to questioning in cross-examination. Now I've got a free gift for you. Here, I mentioned and prefaces are used in direct examination and very rarely in cross-examination. Here's one, a very rare example. And notice that the district attorney is up to something. And you had strong feelings over Larry at that time. He's in a sense neutralizing that question by treating it as just a kind of a straightforward agenda. This is a neutral kind of agenda, a routine question. And I wouldn't say she falls for it, but she does answer yes. And you had strong feelings over Larry at that time. Yes, that's to say the and neutralizes or disguises, as it were, the long-term purpose, the project of which this question is the initial opening salvo. That question gets a yes, an agreement, and then in line 3, he can build on that with, you were upset because he was stabbed. She denies that in various ways, but we've seen that already. So in other words, the and preface here is strategic by neutralizing the direction in which he's going with this question, trying to disguise that. That's all I'll say about that. actually, let me just review. So we've seen three features of cross-examination. One is that each question implies a challenge of some kind to the defendant's answer. We've seen that that's done very often through setting up contrasts. You weren't upset, you were happy, which are tendentious contrasts. They are false contrasts in a way, you could say. And one can also see that the defendant is, of course, perfectly aware of where these things are going and tries to select words which are defensive. And then there was this instance of the strategic use of and-preface as a disguise. So that here is the summary, really, of that. What one sees is that questions, first of all, are connected together. They are not random or unconnected. They build in a sequence. So they're cumulative, and we call this a line of questioning. That is very different from questions in other settings, and very different, of course, from ordinary social talk. The connections differ between direct examination and cross-examination. In direct examination, they accept or use that prior response by the defendant. Whereas in cross-examination, they doubt or try to discredit the previous answer. So they are hostile. So there's the difference between cooperative and hostile questionings. Witnesses respond really according to their perception of the direction in which the questions are heading. I'm going to illustrate that a bit more in the event on the 10th of July. I'm going to just in a very short time show you the cross-examination of the victim in a rape trial, and show you how, of course, witnesses are very aware of where they're being led, and so that where they see questioning directed towards discrediting their testimony, they respond defensively. So that one thinks of questions being connected in a line of questioning, and that line of questioning is strategic, it's goal-oriented, whereas ordinary social conversation is simply contingent. It's more, it's made up on the spur of the moment. Of course, these lines of questioning will have been thought about very carefully by lawyers. Now, just wanted to note the final activity you had on the extension tasks. I haven't mentioned these throughout, but the extension tasks gives you the opportunity to compare these two different direct examination, cross-examination, and to see what other differences you can see between the two. And I've given there a note about, particularly the third one, about the strategic significance of the words chosen by lawyers and defendant. When we talk about people choosing the words carefully, and they do particularly, of course, in court, we do mean that they're choosing their words carefully, and you can see that. It's very visible, transparent in courtroom interaction. The key points then to what I've said are these. Language is action. We're doing something. It's not simply descriptive. We are doing things with that. And I do, again, mention this information sheet 1, which gives you the background to that, kind of the theoretical background to that. The questioning patterns amount to a distinctive mode of talk in this setting. So, you know, in your syllabus, and I think this would be true for other syllabuses besides Cambridge, there's a real interest in different modes of talk. How do we talk differently in one setting than in another? And what I've shown is questioning patterns that are very distinctive of the mode of talk in this setting. That there's a restricted turn-taking system in courtroom examination. Again, I mentioned this with a paper that I've written with Fabio Ferraz, which you have, and it really does give you the background to this comparing ordinary social interaction with courtroom examination in terms, of course, pre-allocation of turn types. I would mention that questions and answers they are only in a way of describing the grammatical construction, the grammatical package. They are minimal descriptions of turns at talk. To say that that one of these questions, you know, you didn't feel bad, you could have felt happy. To say that that's a question, but of course it's doing so much more than that. It's expressing skepticism, or, you know, in other cases we see accusing or blaming. That's to say, although these are questions and answers, those are only the grammatical packages that the actions are embedded in questions and answers. And I've explored the differences between questioning and direct and cross-examination, and highlighted how important word choice and linguistic expression is. Hugely important in court, as it is indeed in any social environment, social setting, social interaction. My take-home message is from Wittgenstein, but this is the kind of Wittgenstein that will appeal to students. He said that language is, his point is that language is never idle. It's never on holiday. We use language to do work, and we use language to do work at work. And then I've given just a brief summary of that. So language is always at work, and particularly so in criminal trials. And here on the final slide, you'll see just a summary of the accompanying materials for this. And then I've also noted that there are real opportunities to apply this approach for student A-level work. Now, you might think, first of all, well, you know, it's difficult to get data for courts. Actually, by Googling, you can get a surprising amount of data from a variety of social settings. But one point is to stress that I've been talking about pre-allocation of types of turns, a pre-allocated turn-taking system. That is applicable to many situations: interviews, news interviews, job interviews, etc. So the broad principles of this apply to other things. But on emergency calls, I remember doing work with undergraduate students on emergency calls, and I didn't give them any data, but they could find them on the internet. There is a large amount of material there that you can get, and it is ethical. We've been through this with our university ethics boards, and that kind of thing is ethical. So that's it. My thanks to you all. And I wanted also to note a thanks to Heather Turner, doctoral student in the department, who helped me to prepare these materials. But thank you all very much for bearing with me through this. Thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing you in July. Goodbye.